The Secure in Mind podcast series is an educational initiative of the Cybersecurity Advisors Network, or CYAN. CYAN is an international not-for-profit trust network of experts in technology, policy, ethics, and good practice. Our mission is to strengthen society's safety, resilience, and ability to fight against cybercrime and similar threats. Visit us at cybersecurityadvisors.network. Hello, and welcome to another episode in CYAN's Secure in Mind video and podcast conversation series. This series is an attempt from the Cybersecurity Advisors Network to present interesting topics and interesting people who can speak to have an expert opinion on what's going on in the cyber world, whether it's cyber warfare, cyber policy, technology, and related issues. I'm joined today by two very illustrious guests. So Mei Danowski from Natto Thoughts and Eugenio Benincasa, who is an occasional contributor to the blog, has his own platform from I believe, the Center for Strategic Studies at the Swiss Federal Polytechnic in Zürich. Natto Thoughts, I strongly recommend that anybody with an interest in cyber threat actors and analysis check them out. They're on Substack. It's an absolutely amazing resource with some really well-researched articles by top contributors. I subscribe, and I would love to get more of my colleagues in the industry to regularly have a look at it. Today, we're going to talk about a topic that's been recently covered, specifically Chinese cyber ranges. Before we get into more details, maybe Mei and then Eugenio, would you like to introduce yourselves?
Thank you, John. Like John just said, I'm a researcher specialized in strategic threat intelligence and the East Asian, particularly China's political, military, economic, strategic affairs. In the past, I have held positions in both public and private sectors. In 2023, so I co-founded Natto Thoughts. Natto Thoughts focused on cyber threat intelligence research analysis from geopolitical, economic, and social, cultural, and linguistic perspectives. So that's differentiate us from other cyber threat intelligence forms, more focused on threat hunting. So we try to provide a context in what that really means and the threat actor motivation and intents, and that's what we try to do in Natto Thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you. Eugenio, your turn.
Yeah. Hi, everyone, and thank you, John, for having us. So I'm a senior cyber defense researcher at the Center for Security Studies at ETH Zurich. Before joining CSS, I worked as a cyber threat analyst with the Italian government for a few years. Before that, I covered research roles in the United States and think tanks. And then before that, I was a crime analyst with the New York Police Department. And now at CSS, what I got here about a year and a half ago, I focused mostly on China's offensive cyber ecosystem, but mostly looking at civilian researchers and elite hackers and how they contribute to the broader ecosystem.
It's really impressive. I'm always floored by the CVs of some of the people that take the time to talk to me. So thanks very much for joining us today. So as mentioned, we're going to talk about Chinese cyber ranges. Now, the concept of exercises has been one that's been growing in significance over the past couple of years. So my personal focus has been on Europe, specifically public-private exercises, not only the strategic, more kind of tabletop exercises that we've seen, but also the tactical cyber range. So for those not familiar with it, you sent me a really good definition, which I'm actually going to read verbatim here. And that is, cyber ranges are interactive and simulated platforms that replicate network systems, tools, and applications according to the U.S. National Institute of Standards and Technology, or NIST. NIST recognizes that cyber ranges have a crucial role to play in facilitating and promoting cybersecurity education, training, and certification. So this is one of several types of activities that we've seen as complementary in terms of identifying not only gaps in our current cybersecurity readiness and posture, whether it's in public sector entities, in private companies, or in entire societies, but also in terms of training offensive capabilities by for example, penetration testers. Some people who are listening to this may be familiar with red teaming exercises, where you basically simulate an attack from the perspective of an attacker. Purple teaming, which mixes the so-called blue team with the red team, so having internal defender knowledge, but coming from an attacker's perspective, and related exercises, and as I mentioned before, tabletop exercises, which tend to be more kind of executive level. So in Europe, very famously, we have the Locked Shields exercise, which is a public-private exercise coordinated by the Natto, let me get this right, Collective Cyber Defense Center of Excellence in Tallinn, Estonia. It's primarily a military exercise, but involving a lot of private sector actors. We have various levels of both tactical, technical, and strategic exercises in places like the United Arab Emirates, where the central bank facilitates a regular exercise with its constituent firms. Eugenio kindly provided me a reference to the NIST in the US, NIST, CISA, the Cyber Infrastructure Security Agency tabletop exercises packages. The UK National Security Centre has something called the Exercise in a Box, and there's a whole lot of other resources, both commercial and public, which allow, for example, companies to drill together with stakeholders and especially their peers, but also government agencies. And obviously, from the public sector, the interest is in making sure that everybody's ready for the inevitable attacks, whether it's by state actors, state affiliated actors, private sector actors, criminal actors, doesn't really matter. The reason we got talking about this is Natto Thoughts has recently published a series of analysis articles on a set of leaks out of China called iSoon. I strongly encourage you to not only check out Natto Thoughts in general, but also their thoughts on the broader significance of iSoon and what it entails. Today, we're specifically going to talk about one aspect of this, which is Chinese cyber ranges. So I want to hand over to you guys if you want to start digging into the topic. What are we talking about here? What are they doing? Why does it matter? And what are some of the findings that you guys have experienced in this topic specifically?
Sure, thank you, John. I can start with that. So the topic of cyber ranges and to look at cyber range ecosystem in China really came to our attention about a couple months ago in September 2024, when the FBI announced the seizure of a botnet operated by Integrity Technology, or also referred to as Integrity Tech, which is a Chinese tech company that is linked to the threat actor Flex Typhoon, which has targeted critical infrastructure globally, including in the US and Taiwan. And this has really provided valuable insights into the Chinese high-tech ecosystem, its relation to offensive activity. And what's interesting is that, first of all, Natto Thoughts had published the connections, Integrity Tech's connection with iSoon in the past, but here what is really unique about Integrity Tech's role within the ecosystem is that it claims to be a leader in cybersecurity testing, evaluation, cyber range, and talent development, and that its core business is in fact cyber range development. So not only did Integrity Tech asserted itself as a leader, but also in the iSoon chat logs that were leaked, the private chat also suggested that this cyber ranges in general were trending. So we decided to look at this more in depth for a particular reasons, because cyber ranges that are used for training, but what they very much useful for. They provide simulated network environments that can collect and store network data, which can be used for different purposes. So, for example, to get insights into network configurations, defenses, vulnerability, and potentially aiding real world targeting initiatives. And adversaries can really use these to leverage techniques, reverse engineer attacks, develop exploits, and so on and so forth. So this specific features really led us to have a deeper look into China's cyber range ecosystem.
I think one of the interesting aspects, I mean, maybe May, you can comment on this as an expert in the East Asian, particularly Chinese side of things, is at least in my experience, there's always some fundamental differences in attitudes and approaches between, for example, quote unquote Western, whether European or Australian or North American actors, and for example Chinese government and corporate sponsors and participants of cyber ranges. What are maybe some of the main distinctions that you've seen? Are there different approaches? Anything that you want to comment on in that regard?
Yes, thank you, John. So as Eugene just said, when we look into these issues, we first found out like in the ISO leak, they actually talk a lot about the cyber range. Like they were talking about setting up a cyber range for the public security bureaus in different levels, even like some just like county level, because they really need somebody set up the cyber range for training, training for
like when you say public security, is this like Ministry of State Security guys?
Yeah, Ministry of Public Security. That's kind of like a police force in the Chinese system. Then we found out just between the chat, they were kind of saying, "Oh, this things is really trending. It's where we can make money," because I assume the companies and also Integrity Tech is all business. So in terms, where the money from, working with the government, when the government have the demand, then they can make money from that demand. So that's, driven for this services grow very fast in the way to understand in the context of the Chinese cybersecurity industry. So we haven't seen this since 2008, when we understand the Western market, Western cyber range development. So when DARPA first, what's the second? DARPA is the U.S. Defense Advanced Research Projects. First announced the National Cyber Range, that's in May 2008. Then China actually in 2009 was talking about to developing cyber range. So all those years, when the cyber range development was come along with the cybersecurity industry development on par, with the general development is how this industry grows.
It's actually really interesting because we tend to think about Chinese threat actors as this anything in terms of cybersecurity in China, I guess, in the context of threat actors, APT groups, and this kind of monolithic set of aggressors that we whether in the private sector or in governments encounter, APT, whatever. And the fact that you're looking at specific companies with a profit motive, with a commercial activity, I think we tend to very often forget that there is a very vibrant commercial ecosystem that whatever the objectives of the Chinese, the CCP or the government of the PRC are, there's a commercial, there's a capitalistic profit motive, and similar to cyber range providers in again, quote unquote Western countries. You have some comments in some of the notes that you sent me about addressing some of the main cyber range providers. Can you go into that also a bit from the perspective of what sets them apart and maybe what differentiates them from maybe your classic, again, I hate the term Western, but let's use it because I'm lazy, from their Western counterparts?
Eugenio probably have more on this particular three companies we had to look into it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and thank you also for the context and background information, John. I think it's important also to mention for listeners that it's important to look at the private sector and the commercial ecosystem, because within China's offensive cyber ecosystem, private companies are often leveraged to conduct attack operations on behalf of state agencies. So when it comes to cyber ranges in particular and the ecosystem, we've looked at there are different reports in China that list the main cyber range providers, and some of them do not list them in a specific order of importance. But we did find one report that provides a ranking of the top 10. Again, this is the ROAR 2024 Network Security Industry Atlas. And from this ranking, we decided to look at the top 3 companies. And these are Alex, which is number 1, EX, then CyberPeace or Sunny Network Security, and Integrity Tech.
And by the way, just a quick comment. We'll link a link to all these reports and all these research. Whatever you send me will be linked to in the video and podcast comment section.
Okay, sounds great. Yeah, so these companies have some similarities, but also differ from each other. So that when it comes to similarities, first of all, these 3 are all listed in these different reports that I just mentioned. Then they happen to be what is called tier 2 vulnerability suppliers of China's National Vulnerability Database of Information Security, which is CNNBD. What this really means, in short, is that this company, to a private partnership, to a private voluntary framework between the CNNBD and individual company, they provide a certain number of vulnerabilities annually, then is channeled to the MSS or China's foreign intelligence agencies for consideration for potential cyber operations. And another characteristic that have in common, 2 of them in particular, Integrity Tech and Sunny Network, is that they provide cyber ranges for a lot of capture the flag hacking competitions that happen in China. Now, capture the flag competitions basically are hacking contests where participants compete in different challenges that are simulated, so they do not breach real targets or systems. So this is an important aspect, and the cyber range provides the environment, the simulated environment where these competitions are hosted. And so, for example, just looking at some of the features of these providers, if we think about Integrity Tech, whose operation were disrupted by the FBI a couple months ago, it has, for example, a 20.4% share when it comes to the cybersecurity training market in China. And it's definitely the largest contributor of cyber range, the largest provider of cyber range platforms when it comes to the most prestigious and likely the majority of China's hacking CTF contests. And there are also some that are affiliated with the MPS. So we mentioned the Ministry of Public Security, as well as the People's Liberation Army or the PLA. And some of these contests also mimic or includes activities for which, let's say, Integrity Tech has been sanctioned by or called out by the US. And the company also has very close ties to government security agencies besides the advisory, and it has been ranked as a top tier provider of national level cybersecurity attack and defense live exercises. Yeah, and so this is what really makes Integrity Tech stands out. But then if we look, for example, Sunny Network, CyberPeace, it plays a similar role in the sense that it's a big cyber range provider for CTF contest. And in particular, the company sponsors what is probably the largest CTF in China, which is called the X-CTF. It occurs on an annual basis, and it's there are different competition rounds that are held all across China, and then the final these competition rounds then converge to a final event. And then finally, Alex is the last example, the last company we looked at, a very interesting case. First of all, it has cyber range solutions across various industries, including wind power, solar energy, gas, manufacturing, education, you name it. And it seems, however, that unlike the previous 2, Integrity Tech and Sunny Network, it hasn't really been adopted widely for CTF contests, but it seems rather a company that very much caters to national security and government agencies in particular. It has a wide line of product called innovative products, those offerings are really very much related to domestic and foreign intelligence and the handling of classified information. And the company's own slogan is forging spears and shields for national security. So this combined with this product line that I just mentioned, then it highly suggests that the MPS and MSS roles are likely among the company's key customers.
So that's actually the spears bit is one thing I wanna, May, I wanna harass you about, because there's, one thing I'm struggling to get my head around is you mentioned, for example, the Chinese Academy of Sciences, right, as a kind of an initiator, a Kickstarter for this activity, and we've seen this in other countries. NIST is a great example in the US, and you mentioned DARPA as well. Our perception of exercises generally, especially ones that are initiated and sponsored and supported by public sector entities, tends to be purely defensive. And every time you have, for example, a public-private exercise, yeah, there's probably somebody, whether it's the NSA, tailored access operations, or whomever is grabbing individuals that stand out in terms of CTF in terms of CTF activities or exercises. But the actual exercise themselves, especially when they're involving private sector firms, I've never seen one that was blatantly designed to create offensive capabilities, because especially in places like Europe and North America, the government tends to be very clear on the delineation between, this is government, we do the hacking, but we don't talk about it, and the private sector is really designed to be defensive in nature. What I've also seen in China is that the technologies very often tend to be much different in terms of things like e-banking, right? Or if you look at Weibo, some of the fundamental mechanics tend to be different from what we're used to in terms of Western platforms. And I'm just curious, like, when Eugenio mentions the spear, it fascinates me, is this idea of leveraging these exercises to create offensive capabilities. Can you?
Yeah, that's a really good point. When we look at it into these issues, China do have like you just said, it's government-led, to start as a cyber range, but do have the PLA organized cyber range exercise. But what we look into here, we saw a booming of private sectors try to develop, but develop cyber range. But in terms what they try to do, publicly when they talk about it, is defensive and offensive together. They didn't really talk about, we just do defensive or offensive. But the main thing is, because the demand from the government saying we need a lot of talent, we need a lot of training facilities, cyber range training, set it up. So one of the things is really alarming, for me, when I read, one of the white papers they published. Just let me see. This one is in 2022. The Ministry of Education, published a white paper. The title is the white paper on the live fire capability of a cybersecurity talent, attack and defense live fire capability. So the live fire in Chinese, they call 实战. So it literally means like a practical capability. So if you translate it in literally, it will be live fire. So it's kind of saying, if we're gonna go to a, in the war situation, what that would like, right? So what kind of skills, capabilities we should have. So as long as, because this white paper is coming from the Ministry of the Ministry of Education. So mainly is a focus on next generation, what we can train them, what we can get them ready for. So that's the one thing, connect to the cyber range in the way why is have become one of the things very trendy, then everybody in business want to talk about it because that's also the demand, from the government as well.
So I mean, the term that comes to the expression that would come to mind for me when you talk about it this way is basically, it sounds to me like there's a coordinated cross-ministry effort to not only help strengthen Chinese domestic industry against, cyber threats, again, whether foreign or domestic, but also kind of create a militia, essentially, a pool of talents from schools or industry that can then be leveraged, recruited, employed, whatever. Is that being too dramatic, or is that a reasonable?
I think that's definitely what the government wanted, government, that's really like government really want that to be pipeline be ready, right? So for the long term, that's another thing, because they literally realized, in the white paper, they actually said by 2027, China's cybersecurity talent gap will reach 3.27 million. But the universities and training, in the university colleges, then only can get 30,000 a year. So that gap is huge. So how to get people ready? You don't have to have a college degree, but you know how to do things. So that's one, cyber range can play a role in this context.
Okay. And I mean, you mentioned, Eugenio, you mentioned some, at least one group that was suspected of involving some talent from this. Some of the, the ones that come to mind for me, for example, are the Typhoons, are, Hafnium, Volt Typhoon, guys like that, the cyber espionage group, the known offensive operations where there's at least some, probably, I guess, you guys know this better than I do, Chinese government involvements. Are we seeing actively in various groups this kind of cross-pollination of this talent for offensive operations already? Is this a widespread phenomenon?
So when it comes to Cyber Rangers specifically, so the company that we described, the Integrity Tech, is linked to one of the typhoons, specifically Flex Typhoon.
Mm-hmm.
So again, this activity were associated with one of the labs within the company, and so the question really here becomes, based also what Mei just described, to what extent can a company that is a leader and as a cyber range leader contribute to whether and to what extent can it contribute or make such operations more efficient or better in some way. So I think this is something that maybe deserves more research and attention. But when it comes to the broader talent ecosystems and pipeline, there is definitely now more than definitely 10 years ago in China, much like a big ecosystem with aligned incentive structures that are aligned with state goals, especially when it comes to development of practical capabilities. And we see with the integration of practical skill, attack defense, or live fire capabilities within the education system, for example, but also to the widespread ecosystem of hacking competitions that in my research I've analyzed over the last few months in over two reports, and the most recent being entitled "Capture the Red Flag" that I co-authored with analyst Sentinel-1 analyst Dakota Carey. And we really looked at the breadth of China's hacking ecosystem that really we believe it to be the most comprehensive globally, because again, it's integration. It's not only its size but also how it is integrated with the education system and also within the job markets. So, for example, what we saw is that there were some contests that caters to specific sectors such as healthcare and law enforcement, for example. There are, in the healthcare case, there is a competition that in order to participate, you have to be a member of a healthcare organization like a hospital. So that we thought that was really interesting, as that basically creates a competitive environment within professionals of these institutions, which which I think is pretty unusual. And then similarly to law enforcement, then you have contests that really replicates realistic scenarios for forensic investigations, for example, and so on and so forth, besides classic CTF challenges.
So we got about 5.5 minutes left. I wanna drop one last question on you, just a quick one. Do you see any cross-pollination between, your American, European, whatever cyber range activities and providers and Chinese? Are there Chinese participants that you're aware of that are actively joining these exercises to gain knowledge, to compare notes, or is this really something that is purely being built up domestically?
So, as far as I know, we haven't really looked into that part. But from what I understand, from China's side, they really wanted to catch up all on par with United States and Europe in terms of cyber range development. So do they kind of communicate, with the counterparts? That's very likely, but in what kind of contact? I had to look into more about it. So that's really a good question.
That's one I find it interesting to, because we have a lot of, in the non-cyber arena, we've got a lot of companies that want to get in the Chinese market. I guess we don't look very much on, we have Western, for example, especially US export restrictions on certain types of commercial interactions with Chinese firms or governments. So it would be actually really interesting to look into that in the future to see what these relationships, if any, are. We're coming up on time, and I just want to give you an open floor for a couple of minutes. If there's any other aspects that you think we need to cover, anything that you also want to plug from Natto Thoughts, hopefully we can do a couple of more of these on various topics. Floor is yours.
Thank you, John.
Shamelessly self-promote.
So Eugenio and I was thinking about there's a future project is on the cyber range. Particularly, we want to look into what this market have been going, in the past and the future, and who is a major player, other than the three companies we look into it. So we want to find out more companies doing cyber range business, and what their difference, what they're similar, and what their goal is. Then find out, maybe we can find out more about this whole ecosystem. That's the one thing, future project we want to do. And also, as you just mentioned about the Chinese cyber range providers coordinate with the Western companies, or the Western, anything you related. So that's a really good topic. And I was thinking, I'm not sure. Maybe Eugenio haven't seen anything about that. It's just fascinating me about thinking about that question.
Yeah, this is actually really interesting. So I'm not too familiar with European cyber range companies specifically, like the purposes for which these cyber ranges are used, in particular when it comes to training and skills development. I've had the chance to talk to some of the, for example, CTF practitioners in Europe. So, for example, including the coach of Team Europe participates in the annual global competition. And it's, for example, that as well as American practitioners, and they've said, as for example, something that is not done as much in the US and Europe, which could be done, is to have more training and exercises, including contests that prioritize attack defense scenarios, so realistic scenarios, as opposed to puzzle-like challenges like classic CTF Jeopardy style. So to really push this development of offensive skills for defensive purposes. So this idea is still a little controversial broadly speaking, but it is something that there is definitely a big difference. Again, when looking at the Chinese ecosystem, they emphasize a lot attack defense and practical skills, unlike us in Europe or the US.
Cool. And with that, we're really coming up on time. I want to thank you both very, very sincerely. This has been a really cool conversation. And please, please, please do check out Natto Thoughts. This is one of the few security updates, newsletters, blogs I subscribe to. And of course, Eugenio's work, I will link to that as well. We'll have links to all the papers and all the resources and reports and whatnot in the video description, as well as, of course, Natto Thoughts and the CSS site and Eugenio's publications as well. I wish you all a very successful evening and day, morning, whatever, and see you on the next one. Stay safe, stay well, and thanks again. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us in this latest edition of the Secure in Mind podcast series, courtesy of the Cybersecurity Advisors Network. Visit us at cybersecurityadvisors.network/media and /blog for additional episodes and articles. Follow us on LinkedIn, YouTube, SoundCloud, Podcast Republic, and iTunes, and don't hesitate to get in touch. Stay safe, stay smart, stay educated, and stay secure.